Staying with the show tonight. Kessie Nair's use of the K-word against President Cyril Ramaphosa this week shocked the country. But what is it about the South African psyche where we continue to see many of these incidents? And why does it seem that even the criminalization of racism is not necessarily an appropriate deterrent? Well, we talked to historian Professor Pitika Ntuli and to a black consciousness activist, Zithulele Cindi, about the legacy of apartheid and perhaps being part of the reason why we're having to confront some of these issues. Gentlemen, let me thank you both for your time tonight. Firstly, just perhaps to get your views, what did you make of the video that was recorded by Nair this week?
Well, I suppose a bit of shock, revulsion when you... Firstly, one tried to dismiss it and said that it's only when others said, hey, have you heard that thing? And you said, what is it? Then you start listening to it, okay. It's a bit cranky to some extent, but that does not suggest that he is not well. I'm just saying it's cranky. I guess the first thing that hits you is to say, oh, well, how bold was he? Why was he so brave to say that? Mm-hmm. But then you say to yourself, probably it's what he's always believed in. And that's where one starts from. He's always believed in that. It's ingrained in him. It's some prejudice that probably through his socialization stayed with him even into this new era. That's basically how I would take it.
Prof?
I mean, for me, when I actually looked at it, it just came up to me as somebody who is so definitely feel an inferiority complex, so empty actually in himself, who feels that there's nothing he can do that he can be noticed. And therefore, what he has to do is to insult the president, embarrass his family, embarrass his own community. I don't buy the idea that he's crazy. But if somebody who is in business, who seems to be as good as it is, although of course he is a fraudster, if he's so brave to say this thing, you begin to wonder as to whether who is backing him.
There's, of course, always a debate around the extent to which such incidents, especially those that are recorded, are then further publicized either through the sharing on social media or the reporting of these incidents. And just on a case-to-case basis, do you think that it is still helpful for us as a country to continue consistently with the release of every new video being shocked by what has happened, because it seems to play right into the agenda of those that would be recording the videos?
Well, in a sense, okay, it's just that one didn't want to do an analogy. I mean, there's been a situation where we say, are these acts of racial violence on the increase, or is it because they are being reported more on? I mean, it's more or less the same thing. But where I said earlier on, I said probably it's to do with socialization of people. Let's face it, we rushed into this new dispensation 24 years ago. We rushed into it with all hope and expectations that it will bring about, shall we say, kumbaya, living well and nicely. But the reality is that there's these racial prejudices which are there, and it will take some time. We may come with the best constitution, try to right the wrongs, but until and unless the racial prejudice, I'm sorry, the prejudice within the people's mind has not been addressed, we're going to pick up these things from time to time. You'll need to understand that while these are the ones that become visible and are seen all over, how many more are not reported? I mean, that's basically where I was saying that the concern is it because these things are reported? I hope you're not suggesting that this should not be distributed because they're coming, we're coming across them. No, it's how people feel. Whether it's genuine, whether it's putting up a show, that's something that needs to be examined.
The point I'm really raising is part of the debate that says that the perpetrators of these racist utterances are being given unnecessary attention. That's certainly a sentiment that is expressed across the board, that why are we even sharing this video? And what I'm asking is there still value and merit in sharing this information and making sure that the whole world or the whole of South Africa knows that there's a Kessie Nair who said this about the president?
Yeah, I mean, you can't block it, because once it's up onto the social media, he had released the video. Then there has got to be the media coverage in order to unpack it, in order to stop other people, from moving and doing the same. But for me, I trace this thing right back to our negotiations when we came up with a truth and reconciliation, because we actually aborted it. If at all the truth and reconciliation went on, we would have then discovered at that stage that Magnus Malan, the whole general, was a pedophile, and all of these people. Then we are going to see how very insidiously sick, actually racism is. But not to get somebody like, Kessie Nair, third degree oppressed, because it's the whites, it's the coloreds, it's the Indians, and it's this, and it's also pandering, to what has been happening, actually, to him. Basically, one could actually think that is somebody who is singularly unintelligent.
Let's talk about the Human Rights Commission anti-racism pledge. They have this new pledge. I don't know if you've had the opportunity of seeing it. And part of what it says is that it also includes intolerance and discrimination as being some of the contributing factors to racism and how it is expressed in our society. In terms of the fact that these are tangible things that people express, whether it will be through in traffic, there's some intolerance that we display, in engagements there will be some discrimination that we face, but we don't necessarily see it as being direct contributors to racism necessarily. So how do we conscientize then the nation that racism doesn't start with the day that you call somebody the K word, but it is actually an experience and different behavioral patterns that ultimately contribute to that?
Well, again, I want to say that it's ingrained racial prejudice. I said earlier on your socialization, Professor Ntuli touched on it briefly, but he left it. Remember, we come from a racially divided society. We still are racially divided. Fine, we have a constitution, we have a democratic dispensation, but embedded in that, or going together with that, we still the most unequal society. Put that aside. What I wanted to highlight is that the point he touched on, whites were the oppressors, but then they had to use divide and rule, and they, to a less degree, oppressed the so-called colors. To a less degree, they oppressed the so-called Indians, because we don't have Indians anymore. These are descendants of those who came through indentured labor 3-4 centuries back. They came here. Now, these are no longer the Indians. They have no attachment to India. That's why we in the Black Consciousness Movement came with an all-embracing expression that we are black people. As long as we can understand those kind of things, we close doors to prejudice, then we can begin to look into working towards an open society. Like I said earlier on, whether you want to legislate or want to discourage the distribution, it doesn't stop the fact. I mean, it's like crime. There's been an outcry, say, don't report on crimes, on criminality, because then you get copycats. No, people are going to commit crime, whether you hide it or not. Importantly is that we need to address the causes thereof. What causes that? Then we look at that. What causes someone to imagine and look at someone who to be inferior? We go back to the socialization, racial prejudice that he had, where he believes because he comes from a certain population group, he can't be led by someone coming from a population group where you and I are coming from. So those are things that come out into the open, and then he plays it out.
What do you see as some of those causes, the underlying causes of racism in the country?
Yeah, I mean, the whole kind of system legislated these prejudices, and people lived with them, and they really believed, in them. In the new dispensation, as we South Africans are always very brilliant with coming up with brilliant ideas, but we have got worse ingenuity of not following on what we did. If at all we led the commission on religious, linguistic, and all of the other things, that could actually be highly publicized, given the resources that it is. We could be able to handle these things and create debates. The issues of racism, again, they are not even on our curriculum, when they should be done to educate some of the younger people who do not actually even know. The younger ones, when they hear him actually say this, they may take it differently, from Zithulele and I. So we need a total kind of a cultural revolution centered on the very black consciousness that we're actually talking about, that is going to make us, our people, strong to be able to tackle and to deal with these issues uncompromisingly.
All right, I'm going to ask you to both hold your thoughts because we have a caller on the line, Lloyd from the Free State. Lloyd, good evening.
Good evening. Yes, racism, it will exist for very long because even at our workplace, racism is not addressed. That's why this businessman can say whatever he wants to say because he's used to it. You know, Labour, when you go to the Department of Labour and say I have a problem with the white man is racist or what, Labour simply tell you we don't have system to deal with racism. And most of the time, where do we spend with people? We spend it at our workplace. So if we don't have systems that will, in terms of in our workplace, to address racism, even in terms of employment, you can have a skill, but the white man, you must give a skill to that white man, and he will earn better salary than yours. So those issues, those are the things that we really need to look into. And, you know, the other issue that we have, we as black people, I realize, the person that oppresses you, no matter if your husband is beating you up, you always try to prove to himself that you are lovable or you are worth it. So I think we start to address our issues and try to protect this thing that is called black brand. Is the better we will start to understand the issues of South Africa.
All right, Lloyd, thanks for your contribution on the show tonight. Lloyd, specifically speaking about racism in the workplace and there being lack of sufficient systems to deal with racism that is experienced in corporate environment, in a professional environment.
Well, again, even there in the work environment, you find that there's this stratification of people. Again, we go back to the history. Unfortunately, most people say, no, let's move on. But the history teaches us where we come from, so that we don't commit the same mistakes. For as long as we want to paper over these things, we're going to have a problem.
And why is it not easy to move on? Perhaps for people who do ask the question, let's move on. You know, all the problems that we have, everybody keeps going back to apartheid and saying, oh, apartheid this, apartheid that, and it sounds like it's a big just complaining rally. Why can't we just move on?
Because we did not address those vagaries of apartheid. I think what we were all preoccupied about, the powers that be and those negotiators said, I think let's get and create this new South Africa. Rainbowism came. Now, we did not look into the ingredients that bring rainbowism. For many people, rainbowism means we go play a rugby match in Soweto and have a pap and braai. We are one nation. No, that's not.
Heritage Day is coming up.
Well, I didn't want to go there. Consciously didn't want to even be in the, because most of the times I wear this thing, it's my heritage. But anyway, what I wanted to highlight is that we did so many things that wanted to please the outside world without necessarily addressing ourselves as fellow human beings internally. We encouraged, you know, we had 100% this. I don't know if they've seen this, Kathy. 100% Zulu, 100% vendor, stickers already in cars. So we're already encouraging this ethnic rise, right? Which basically is some of the things that your Kessie Nair are also hankering to. He's bringing up his own ethnic prejudice and upbringing. That's why then he believes, because the powers that be then told him, you are the third layer, as Professor Ntuli said, but you are better off. You must make sure that the fourth layer, who happens to be the African, must not rise above you. So in his mind, he's told himself he's not going to be led by a black person, and that's why then he is able to have the gall to say those kind of things.
All right. I'm going to have to stop you there because we have another caller on the line. Paul from Cape Town. Paul, good evening.
Good evening, Kathy. Good evening to your viewers. I'm just somewhat curious about the Prof's statement with regard to whites, coloureds and Indians. We have a Julius Malema of the EFF in this country who's blatantly calling for the death of white people, coloureds, Indians, etc. Yet his name doesn't come up. He seems to be protected by the ANC. I'm not understanding this. Why is it only white, coloureds and Indians and not also black people that are probably the worst racists?
Okay. So Paul, what makes you think that Julius is protected by the ANC?
Well, I believe, and a lot of people are believing and know that the ANC and the EFF are in bed together. You know, that's become common knowledge because Malema is never ever reprimanded for any of his racism, his behavior, etc. So it's becoming common knowledge that they're actually working together.
All right. Well, I'm sure that the record would show something different, even if we reference just some of the equality court cases that he's had to go through. But Prof, what's your response to that?
I mean, when Paul says black people are the worst racists, it comes from such a low level, even I can rise above it. The sooner we leave it, the better. Talk about people for 300 years have been put. We are the most forgiving, people, the most accommodating, people. For him actually to say that speaks about his own privileges that he had gone. He's questioning my state that has been white on top, then coloreds, then Indians, and then black. He's got a problem actually with, with that. I think he should organize a meeting with Kessie Nair and compare notes.
All right. Well, I think that might be a good note to end this conversation. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I do think that there's so much more of this conversation that needs to be had, because racism is such a broad thing. And certainly when you look at it through the prism, too, of what the Human Rights Commission is looking at when they do their work in racism, there's so much more that goes into it than what we see from the videos that at least go viral.